Okay, welcome to the first part of this antibody identification video. So what I want you to have ready here is the panel on Mrs. A. Johnson. It is in the module on page 13, but if you would like a nicer, clearer copy of it, you can find it on Brightspace, and I think that might be a better idea. In addition, you need a pencil and a highlighter. So what we've got here, you guys, is a panel on Mrs. Johnson. So her ID and a bit of information is up on the top left-hand corner. So she's a female that's in for a C-section. And over on the right-hand side, we can see that she's A negative. And I'm assuming that this patient had a positive antibody screen, perhaps had a type-in screen done prior to her C-section. And the screen came up pause. So they proceeded to do a panel. Now, typically on someone that's female, childbearing age, we would phone and see if they received Rh immune globulin, because that is anti-D, and that can be passively transferred obviously into her plasma and result in her having a positive screen. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll assume that that was, I guess, not done, and they proceeded to do a panel, a full panel. So you'll see cells 1 through 11 have been set up. So what they did there is set up 11 test tubes and put 2 drops of plasma in each test tube. And then to each test tube, they added 1 drop of the appropriate panel cell, 2 drops of PEG, and proceeded with the IAT antibody ID. So you can see at the top of the column here that it says IAT PEG, and a panel is always done in the same phase as the screen. So if a screen is done by IAT PEG, the panel is done IAT PEG. You suddenly don't switch to doing, let's say, a room temperature panel or a panel that uses a different enhancement agent. You use the same process. So we can see here for Mrs. Johnson that the reactions are listed here. So this is this patient's plasma with panel cell 1 did not react. With panel cell 2, her plasma did react, and etc. So please have your module open to page 9, and we're going to get started on the process of identifying the antibody by excluding antibodies that we do not think are present. So, according to page 9, step number 1, the first thing that we're going to do is check the auto control. So down here at the bottom, it says PC, which means patient cells. And we can see that the patient cells put in a test tube with their own plasma did not react. So that's the first thing that we check. If this is positive, we may be dealing with a patient that has an autoantibody or an autoantibody and an alloantibody. So obviously for your first antibody ID, I'm not throwing an autoantibody at you guys. So this patient does not have an autoantibody. The antibody showing up in their plasma is an alloantibody. It's been produced against an antigen that they lack, that they have been exposed through transfusion or pregnancy. So the next thing we're going to do is check the strength of the reactions. So this is on page 9. I'm following the steps, and we're on step 2. So the strength of the reactions are either negative or 2+, the whole way down. I don't see a bunch of variation. So negative, 1+, 3+, whatever. If I do see that kind of variation, I'm more concerned that there might be more than one antibody present. So obviously today, for our first antibody, we're starting with a fairly simple situation, and there's just one antibody present in this patient's plasma. So we're going to start excluding. So this is step 3, page 9, and listed are a bunch of rules that only apply to SATE. These rules will be different at the hospital sites that you do your practicum at, and possibly at the sites where you end up working. So I'm going to help you through this. And I'm assuming that you have read all the material that has been suggested to you prior to starting this. So I'm hoping you've followed the guided lesson plan, worked through what I had written there, asked me some questions if you needed to, etc. Okay, so what we're going to do is highlight the negative rows. So the rows in which the patient's plasma did not react with the panel cell. So I'm going to do that. You can get out your highlighter and do that as well. So take a look over here, it's negative. So I'm going to highlight rows 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so I hope you've done that. Now the question is, why? Why am I highlighting the negative rows? Well, if you look back on page 3 of your module, you guys all took the time to read that. The second paragraph says, actually I'll read the bold part, the presence of an antibody is ruled out by demonstrating non-reactivity of the patient's sample with the panel cells that demonstrate the corresponding antigen. So the reason I'm highlighting negative rows is because we are going to start excluding, as in saying that that antibody is not present based on non-reactivity of the patient's plasma with the antigens on the cells. So we're going to get started working on that. So we're going to go down each column and we're going to start at D. So I'm just going to move my paper over a little bit. So looking down the D column, I'm going to see if I have any D positive cells that did not react with the patient's plasma. So I only need to look at the highlighted rows, right? I'm looking for D positive cells that did not react with my patient's plasma. And I have the rows highlighted that did not react. So when I look down here, I'm just looking at these highlighted rows. Okay, I don't have any D positive cells that did not react with my patient's plasma. On to C. So I'm looking at the big C. I'm not looking at everything else, you guys. I'm just looking down this column where it says big C. So I've got a positive big C cell that did not react with my patient's plasma. So I am saying tentatively that the patient's plasma does not contain an anti-big C. Does that make sense to you? The patient's plasma was reacted with a panel cell that has the C antigen on it, and it did not react. This is a heterozygous cell, so that concerns me because perhaps the patient's plasma contains an anti-big C that isn't strong enough to react with a heterozygous cell. So we'll think about that, but I've got one slash because I found this C positive cell that did not react with my patient's plasma. Continue down the column only to the highlighted rows, and I don't have any more C positive cells that did not react with my patient's plasma. On to big E. Looking at the highlighted rows, these are rows where patient's plasma did not react. I have an E positive cell here that did not react with my patient's plasma. So I have some evidence that the patient's plasma does not contain an anti-big E. The little C column. I've got a C positive cell here, little C positive cell that did not react with my patient's plasma, and I put a slash across little c. Let's continue down to the other negatives. Oh, look at this. I have a little C positive cell, again, that did not react with my patient's plasma. And this time I'm a little bit happier because this is actually a homozygous little C cell. And it did not react with my patient's plasma. So I am putting a second slash across little c. I found a heterozygous little C cell that did not react with the patient's plasma. And then I found a homozygous C cell, little C cell that did not react. And actually, there's many little C positive homozygous cells that did not react with the patient's plasma. What are the chances that your patient's plasma contains an anti-little c that would not react with the strongest representation of the little c antigen? Unlikely. Okay, so that's why I have a double cross on the little c. I found at least 2 cells that did not react. Now, before I put my second slash, I have to ensure that the rules, the SATE rules, have been satisfied. So if you turn back to page 9, you'll notice on page 9, point 3, Roman numeral 1, the following antibodies are known to commonly demonstrate dosage, and then it lists a bunch of them, including little c. These antibodies may be excluded, what we're doing now, putting slashes, based on non-reactivity of the patient's plasma with 2 homozygous cells. Okay, well, do we have 2 homozygous? Well, sure, we have many homozygous. Here's another one, another one, another one. So that's why I have 2 slashes on it. And it says in step 3 on page 9, Roman numeral 1, if 2 homozygous cells are not available, at least 1 homozygous cell and 1 heterozygous cell may be used to eliminate these antibodies. But we've managed to eliminate anti-little c based on non-reactivity of the patient's plasma with at least 2 homozygous cells. We've actually got 5. Okay, so that's the idea. Maybe I'll just do little e just to finish it off. Okay, so little e, here I've got a little e positive cell that did not react. I'm going to put a slash. And I'm going to make note, this is a homozygous little e cell, right? It's positive for little e and negative for big E. Continue down the column. Oh, there's another little e positive cell that did not react. This is a heterozygous cell, so not as convincing evidence, but lo and behold, if I continue down, I've got little e homozygous cells that are not reacting, so I've got my second slash. My first slash is that I found a cell that meets the criteria on page 9, step 3, and my second slash means that I found a second cell that finishes off that criteria. I'm going to let you continue across, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about the allelic pairs because it's important to know what the pairs are. Otherwise, you can't look and determine if the cell is heterozygous or homozygous. So if we continue along, there is no allelic pairs for F, CW, or V. And you may or may not know, I guess, that big K and little k are an allelic pair. KPA, KPB, JSA, JSB. It's a little bit hard for you guys to see this grayed out area. It'll look better on your copy. M and N are a pair, S and little s, FYA, FYB, obviously JKA, JKB, Lewis A, Lewis B. They aren't allelic pairs, so I won't do that. Lutheran A, Lutheran B are P1 stands alone and XG stands alone. So I'm going to stop the video now because I'm reaching my maximum, and I'll start up again with a second video. So in the meantime, though, could you please continue along and do the excluding based on the rules in your content module, page 9 of Antibody ID, and please pay attention to step number 3 on page 9, both 3 Roman numeral 1 and 3 Roman numeral 2.